back to another episode of Remotely Speaking Up. And we're very happy to have with us this week, Albert Aziz-Clauson. And Albert is the founder and CEO of Underpinned, a company which support freelancers in setting up their business, as well as the chair of the Association of the Future of Work. And we're going to get into that a little bit later in our episode. So Albert is here today to tell us a bit more about how we can support freelancers and how his company supports freelancers to work better with businesses. Albert, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to join us.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I've been waiting for my chance to be on this podcast.
Good. That is awesome because me for sure, I've been waiting to have you, and I know our audience is going to really value everything you say, especially the passion that you bring over everything with, I would say. All right. So tell us a bit about Underpin and what Underpin does.
So I think the best place to start is why it started. So there's four major problems that we are trying to overcome. And as a bit of context, even to those problems, when I started Underpin, what I was very aware of, this is 4 years ago now, was that there's this massive movement of freelancing and skilled workers, particularly moving into project-based work, where they're focusing kind of more on their value output than they are on their time. But the industry was very geared towards transactional recruitment. So like many different freelance marketplaces and recruiters, but there was very little to no focus in most economies on how do you support the individual in building a better business. Now, if you look at an employee, they generally have their objectives set, they have the infrastructure built around them. They're just there to facilitate a function of their job, right? They are a profession. If you are a freelancer, you're a business. So there's all these other aspects you have to do around your craft or your skill that are actually more valuable commercially than often your skill is inherently. And what that meant is that there's this massive untapped potential within the freelance economy of making that better for people. And if you have a better system around your business, around your craft, you are going to have a better business. And the four key things that we identified as being the biggest barriers to growth for individual freelancers and the freelance economy as a whole were the following. One, lack of education. No one has ever left education or employment knowing how to build a business around their craft, which is bonkers. So we provide a business accelerator program. We provide it through universities. We provide it directly to individuals. And we've helped over 50,000 people learn the core elements of building a business, which, if you're interested, are a commercial proposition, a pitch or portfolio, a target client, a plan for building a professional network, a payment plan or a pricing strategy, and admin and accounting system, right? You have those 6 things, you have a business. You don't have those 6 things, you don't. So we teach how to build them. The second big problem was a lack of horizontal infrastructure, which, to remove jargon and too much detail from, is basically, how do you manage everything in one place? If you're a small business, you have different departments that do different functions, and software systems are set up to serve those different functions. What doesn't exist was a kind of horizontal system to serve the full flow of finding and managing work and getting paid. And so Underpin lay all of those systems on their side and said, here's one place you can do a simple version of all of them, which is what freelancers ultimately need. The third thing was all around the development of a network. So while recruitment might help you find a single job, it won't necessarily help you build a successful professional network. In fact, statistically, as an opportunity cost, dealing with recruitment platforms is a negative opportunity cost on your business's growth as a freelancer. What you need to do is develop a professional network around you. And when we did a massive survey of thousands of freelancers, what we found was the only defining characteristic of a successful freelancer, literally the only thing, was that they had a professional network or a good system for building one. On average, they were often worse at their core skill than people in the early stages of their career. So what we really wanted to look at is how do we facilitate building those meaningful, stable professional networks around an individual without looking at recruitment. So we looked at AI-led matchmaking, where effectively we generate leads for you for businesses that are most interested in learning from you or generating value from you. And the key other problems embedded in that is most SMEs don't know what skills they need from a freelancer, and they don't know how beneficial they'll be. So they're not looking actively for freelancers. So we use this AI system to find the businesses where you have the most in common, often based around your hobbies and interests, so that you're more expert in their industry. We connect you to them and we let you show them how valuable you could be to their business. So effectively creating a whole new market for freelancers. But because 80% of all freelance work happens off recruitment platforms, This allows us to capture that and also facilitate it without worrying about making money off the transaction of interaction. We make money off the facilitation of your work because you use our system to manage your whole workflow. And then finally, the problem of loneliness and isolation. If you are an individual, you're alone and you don't have a system around you. And confidence or lack of confidence and imposter syndrome are two of the biggest things we hear about, or procrastination. These things are born out of not having accountability, not having people to talk to, not having people to fall back on. And so Underpinned builds a community around you where you can find not just a big random community, but a small group of people you can collaborate with, be your peers, and get mentored by. And so Underpinned was founded on that. And final point before I hand back over to you, I'm sorry, is that the key for us was, okay, we can solve all these problems. Once we've solved all these problems, which we have now kind of done, we're in a position where we have a piece of infrastructure that helps the individual build a successful business. And now we're looking to the future of how do we start to build out that proposition so that we can become the infrastructure that underpins the whole of the future of work. So how do we become the system of infrastructure that is used by companies and individuals to facilitate the long-term ongoing nature of flexible work?
Yeah, I love there as well, because you kind of brought, I didn't even have to ask you what underpin means just by your explanation. I get it. You're building that floor of infrastructure that businesses need to be successful. And I commend you. I've never seen or heard anyone get so much information in the space of 5 minutes. That's pretty impressive.
I talk too much.
You talk a lot, but everything that you're saying is really valuable. So I'm going to push this out there, because I think these are some of the things that most people starting a business struggle with. They don't think about the beginning, but when you actually get into the business, then you actually realize, well, I need this, I don't have a person that does this. And I can tell you, I probably hear that word imposter syndrome 10 times a day. And it's such
I find it so difficult because I don't think I've ever met anybody who has like even a reasonable level of education, like they've done some secondary school, who doesn't have a monetizable skill. But I've never met anybody at the beginning of their career who really understands even what a commercial context really is, and how to kind of fit themselves in that. And the idea of imposter syndrome is really just based on the fact that they don't have a support system, they have no one to talk to, and they haven't seen how it's been done. Like, you always talk to even massive founders, and they'll always say, like, no one knows what they're doing, everyone's just modeling through. But you have to see enough of it to know that. And so if you haven't had access to that experience, you just feel like an imposter. And I think, to be honest, even if there's only one thing people get out of working with Underpinned, like for some people, the first and most important thing is being like, I'm not crazy. Okay. there are other people doing this too, and they're seeing the same stuff.
They're seeing the same stuff and they're feeling the same stuff. I remember that was a big eye opener for me back in the day, where my business mentor and my role model, one of the days we started the call and he was a bit down. I was like, what's going on? He said, well, I've just been going through a bit of imposter syndrome today. And I was like, you are experiencing this? So you're very much right. It's something that we take for granted and that most people don't account for. So I think your business is very unique in that way, because another thing I was saying to you earlier as well is that your business focuses on the individual side, where a lot of businesses that focus in the freelance area, especially in the tech area, are all about either connecting the freelancer with the business or supporting the business and working with the freelancer.
Well, here's a really interesting concept that I think more people should be thinking about and tackling. Whenever you build a business, from day one, you need to be laser focused on where the money is going to come from. So who is your customer? And if you're looking at a recruitment market or any kind of supply and demand market, intuitively, the money comes from the demand, right? The people who need freelancers are intuitively the valuable customer, which is actually totally incorrect in the freelance economy. The most valuable customer is the freelancer themselves. And the reason for that is, as I said before, recruitment accounts for a very small percentage of freelance work globally. And there's a few reasons for that. One, very simply, people are more likely to get work through word of mouth or social media. Organic interactions beget trust, which creates a greater likelihood for work. But the second point, which is really important, is the traditional recruitment model works on quite long cycles. You have a job for quite a long time. It's quite high value transactions. So each time you finish a job, you go and find the next job through a recruiter. When you're looking at the freelance economy, the transactions are very small and proportionately low value, even at the very top end. What that means is you need to facilitate quite a large number of them. And so you're relying on facilitating lots of small transactions. The big problem there is the more people I know as a freelancer, the less reliant I become on the recruitment platform. So their most valuable users are the ones that are most likely to leave them, which is a big problem. And once they've left, what value do they generate for them? None. So we don't generate value for the transaction of interaction because the most valuable thing is facilitating the business management process that they have. If you think of a freelancer as a small business, the opportunity becomes much more exciting. I think what I was saying earlier about the concept people should tackle with is exactly that. If you view a freelancer as a micro business, or you view a worker as like a commercial entity unto themselves, they become a much more exciting and valuable thing to interact with. And as a final point before I hand back to you again, the biggest change in the future of work, the most exciting change in the future of work, which I've been talking to loads of people about, is the movement towards output and not input. Traditionally, people are paid for their time. In the freelance economy, successful people are paid for their value added, their output. And what that means is it opens up all sorts of things around flexibility and where you work from and how you work and your working style, to use a term from a book that's going to be coming out soon and should be read by everybody. You allow yourself to really create greater value with less focus on time. And that, I think, is the most exciting opportunity.
Yeah, and I know that is a real struggle for a lot of companies still. I mean, people are coming around, which is good, and companies are coming around, which is important. But one of the biggest issues and challenges that presents to companies is control, because we're talking about the decentralization of work when we're saying, no, focus on outputs and work and let people work in the way that they want. And we know for a lot of businesses, they still struggle with this idea of giving the worker more autonomy and letting them work in a way that's best suited for them as well.
Yeah, and I think that you don't have to give up control or ambition by allowing greater autonomy in individuals, but you do need the individual to be more. You need the individual to be clearer on what their output that's expected is, because then they know how to work towards it rather than just giving you their time. And you need to create systems that allow for greater levels of communication and buy-in. Like one of the things I often hear people saying about freelancers is, yeah, but the problem with a freelancer is like they're not really like committed to your company, and like it's just not true. The best like most valuable people that lots of companies work with are their freelancers, and they might work for 6 different companies, but that doesn't mean they're not passionate about all of those different projects. And I think like that's something that's really overlooked. Yeah,
I agree. I think there's a bit of a myth as well, because often freelancers, as you said, they're seen as the least committed, but ironically, companies expect the most from them. So you treat them as your most casual labor force, but yet you have higher expectations for them than you would have with the employee, but with the least amount of support as well for that freelancer.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, so it's a challenge. I'm going to take a step back though. Why this area? Why did you choose to get into this in the first place? That's question one, because I know you really, I really want your input on that. But then also, tell us a bit about the different categories of freelancers, because I know when people hear freelancers, they think of the gig economy. And there's a big difference between what we call gigsters, what we call free. There's so many names floating around for freelancers. And I don't think always people understand what are the different categories of freelancers. So tell us how you got into this. What was your impetus in starting a business like this? And then what do we mean by those terms?
Okay, cool. I'm on it. So number one, I grew up as a ballet dancer. I went to the Royal Ballet School. That was my whole thing. I was doing 4 to 8 hours of ballet every day and doing my academics on the side. Loved it, but it was very kind of blinders on. And my mind is a very fast moving, crazy place. I'm like an excitable puppy that has access to opportunity. And so I quit ballet and I went and studied and did everything I possibly could, because I had this discipline and hard work, this work ethic from ballet that I now had no framework within which to apply. So I went and did every single sport I could do. I did every single subject I could do, every single extracurricular activity. And I loved it. I loved everything I did. I threw myself in 100%. And then I found out I love philosophy of science, and I did philosophy of science at UCL, and I fell in love with computer science. I started building things. Then I did business strategy consultancy focused on science, tech, and creative companies, like overcoming the high growth barrier, which was a lot about building freelance teams for them to get them over that hurdle. I ran a media and arts company that helped young and emerging artists build businesses, and I ran an arts charity that helped disadvantaged and at-risk children with creative workshopping. Now, all of these things sound different, but the two unifying factors that brought me to Underpinned were, one, the thing I was good at and loved was problem solving within a, commercial context, for want of a better phrase. And what I mean by that is taking a group of facts and skills and constructing the most valuable context for them. That's what I was doing for freelancers. That's what I was doing for businesses. That's what I was doing for disadvantaged and at-risk children, right? Give me a bundle of facts and skills that you have, and let me construct for you the most valuable use case for them, right? So that was what really bore my interest in onto freelancing. And the second thing that really got me towards this specifically was everyone around me in all of those environments was kind of freelancing. Like, the word freelancing, we're going to talk about what it means in a second, but let's just call it like doing their own thing that they were passionate about. Like, all of these people, whether they were young kids through to successful businesses, were all looking at flexibility and value rather than time. And we're all trying to take ownership and independence. And what I realized was the 4 problems that I outlined earlier was fundamental barriers to people doing this. Now, this is a really interesting question about what a freelancer is, because this led me to doing Underpinned. And I categorized it within freelancing because it was the easiest way to group together the people I was talking about. But what I was talking about was really this movement towards value-based opportunity. How do you do a value-based project rather than a time-based project? And how do you generate the most value doing that? So that was the foundation. And then you have, what are the definitions of people within that? So when I say freelancing, I'm very specifically referring to this value-based project way of working. So you're a skilled individual, or rather you're at least being paid for your value that you're producing in a format where you are in many ways independent, but you're working from project to project. Then you have the other 2 ends of the spectrum, which are contractors, which in most opinions is just largely a tax thing. Like, you're working for 1, maybe 2 companies over a very long period of time. You're effectively an employee in many ways. And then you have gig workers, and gig workers or gigsters, the way that I'd articulate them is that they're competitive on price largely. So platforms like Uber and Deliveroo, and to a very similar extent, platforms like Fiverr, where like the primary motive of the demand is price. So I'm looking for, even if it is a skilled job, like making a logo, my primary driver, my primary lever is price. Like how can I get the cheapest version of this that's of a certain quality? Like, I want to have an Uber driver that has a driving license. I want them to be able to be like safe drivers, but I want to pay less for it. Which in many ways can be very dangerous. And I kind of don't want to dive into it too much, because although I have a lot of thoughts on it and there's a lot of ways we can improve it, it's not my like area that I'm currently focused on. What I'm really focused on is like, how do we pull people freelancing, the freelancers that are stuck in the gig economy, out of the gig economy, and how do we make this plot of land in the middle, which is by far the biggest in terms of economic value, by the way, which is skilled freelancers, value-based, project-based workers. How do we galvanize that group as much as possible? Now, the future of work, I think this is a really interesting point. When I started Underpinned, was focused on freelancers. I used the word freelancer. I talked about freelancers. It's a freelance platform. I now don't think Underpinned is a freelance platform. Underpinned is a future of work company. And we're using freelancers as a very, very, very valuable, commercially valuable research project. Freelancers are kind of the early adopters of the future of work. And as you talked about, like the blended, braided workforce of the future is about greater flexibility. It's about greater access to opportunity. It's about value-driven propositions. It's about all of these things where freelancing is this hotbed of innovation in the way that we work. Now, I'm currently working on a policy framework that I'm writing, which I'm hoping will be used by economies across the world, on how to simplify the tax and legal entity systems around worker definitions and identification. And to give you a specific example of this, like where this might be beneficial, as a company right now, you have to hire people as sole traders, as limited companies, as PAYE employees, and via umbrella companies, right? So 4 totally different tax and legal entity structures to hiring a type of worker that ultimately you just want valuable work from. And those systems are born out of quite an archaic linear structure for the way employment works and the fact that tax collection happens via companies. But if you start to dig into how you can open up this opportunity, one really big way is simplifying the structure. If you start to look at workers or individuals that are operating, whether they're full-time, part-time, few jobs, many projects, as an entity that can operate how they want to deliver value, and you create other third parties and interims to do tax collection and other infrastructural stuff and support, you create this massive opportunity to have a diverse, accessible, fair, prosperous, exciting, valuable, engaging economy of workers who can kind of do whatever they want in really valuable ways. And so when it comes to the definition, I think we can get very bogged down on talking about specific groups. But ultimately, what we're driving towards, or what we should be driving towards, is how do we create the greatest access to opportunity, the greatest fairness in treatment and support, and the greatest level of prosperity and value add from the economy of people that we have. And that's like what freelancing represents.
Yeah. Thinking I sound like I'm in church. I'm over here. I'm like, yes, absolutely. Because I so agree with that. And I think often when you speak to people, because they don't necessarily understand the differences between the terms, or there's so much language floating around out there, sometimes people get caught up in what that means, or don't call me this, call me this instead. But then they forget actually what's the underlying need and the underlying issues. But I do like that. And that kind of leads to my next question, because I attended, of course, the Future of Work Summit in London, which you hosted. And then we also went as the Association of the Future of Work to Parliament to talk about some of these issues. So tell us about the role, because I know Underpinned is like your project, but you have a bigger mission when it comes to the future of work and building infrastructure that's suitable for the future of work. So tell us about the Association of the Future of Work and what's the real driving force there.
Yeah, so the Association for the Future of Work, with the tagline, creating a fair, accessible, and prosperous future of work, it's all about creating, with the least amount of energy, the greatest impact in infrastructure, education, and policy to remove the barriers to the future, a successful future of work. And what that means in practice is two very simple things. Number one, the future of work is not a single narrative. It is many different lanes, many different categories, many different problem solutions, many different economies, many different parts of economies. And all of these different bits have different interesting operators in them. They have infrastructural builders, they have educators, they have policymakers, right? And to this day, nobody's ever brought them all together and talked about it as a single narrative. Like, people have talked about it as a single narrative by themselves, but no one has brought all of the actual people doing stuff together. So the Association for the Future of Work is a membership organization aimed at bringing together the top minds, institutions, think tanks, researchers, academics, politicians, journalists, freelancers themselves, other future of work companies into one place where we can do the second thing, which is very simple, which is create the most evidence-based advisory frameworks for educators, infrastructural builders, and policymakers, with the ambition of breaking down the barriers to create a fair, accessible, and prosperous future of work. It's very simple. And the way that it differentiates from think tanks is that while I'm very interested in doing lots of research, I create a problem set. I find out we then do research as an association to validate the problem set. We then create a series of solutions which are tested, and then we present our framework of advice as a very clear evidence-based system. And that allows us to push progress way faster than we could otherwise. And it's also really, really fun.
I won't disagree. Definitely. I've enjoyed the meetings that we've had in that area. And then one of the things I find is that the passion that comes out of it is really just inspiring to hear just how many people are rallying around this new way of work and making sure that it can be supported. And I really like to see that. I know we still have a long way to go policy-wise, but it's really good to see the level of innovation that is bringing about. Can you tell us a bit more about the role of the platform economy in really supporting this and helping freelancers? Because a lot of times, as we were saying earlier, we're talking about the individuals, supporting individual freelancers, supporting businesses that work with them. What about these platform economies? What would you say to them as your role as CEO of Underpinned in terms of what they can do to also support freelancers?
So 3 things. 1, your honeypot is your value. So if you are not supporting your honeypot, you are not generating greater value. Platforms have survived on growth. And what I mean by that is, like, as you build your honeypot of freelancers and you build your demand side, you are surviving on building growth. But the unit economics of it, like the generation of value per unit, is decreasing rapidly. Focus on how to add value to the honeypot, to the individuals, to the freelancers, and you will generate a far more valuable platform than anyone else could. Number 2, the vast majority of work is not happening on platforms. 80%. According to a recent survey I did with 2,500 people in the UK, it was 91%. Through social media and organic and word of mouth, right? So unless you start to look at, as a platform, how to capture work outside of your platform, you are going to struggle to scale beyond a certain size. And then finally, and I think, this is a bold statement, but like, I do not believe in the future of platforms at scale. I believe that recruitment and marketplaces will always serve a purpose, but the biggest opportunity in the future of work, by a long way, is the service provision to facilitate the building of a business and the management and building of relationships between individuals and businesses. Like, that's where the real opportunity is. It's like where the staffing companies of the world meet the platform companies of the world, is where the most exciting thing is happening. And platforms should be looking at that. And I say you should be looking at in the sense that, Underpinned is doing it, and there are a few other smaller things that have started to pop up, and people are starting to realize it, and platforms are starting to invest in it. But that needs to happen for us to create the best possible future work, and for the companies, the most valuable proposition.
Yeah, and in many ways, when you look at it like that, then what we're really saying is that the platforms, many platforms are still at step 1 when it comes to the freelancers. Yes, you help them find a job, but that's the beginning. Beyond helping them find a job, then you also have to help them in terms of maintaining, as you said, their business and so forth. So I like that. It's kind of like in Underpin, you're covering all of your bases and helping the freelancers to do the same.
There's one more quick point in there, which I think, like, I don't want to help people find a job. I want to help people find a network from which they get their work. And I think that's a really different way of viewing it. But if you're a platform, you have to be so focused on the financial transaction of the job that your primary motive has to be to facilitate that transaction. You can't just introduce a load of people and then they'll get work from each other, because you have to be involved in the transaction. And that's why I'm not interested in being involved in that transaction. I'm interested in facilitating the generation of a network without me worrying about how many people you talk to or what's going on, because the value that I'm adding to you comes after.
Yeah. Well, we only have about 5 minutes left, but there are so many pieces of this to pick apart in terms of this conversation, and it's so ongoing and it's so relevant. I mean, we're talking about a complete shakeup in the way that we work. And some people saw it as only attached to COVID, we are only attached to remote work, but the conversation is actually a lot bigger than that. And you really brought that home here. Now, what's next on the horizon for you, and what is next for the Association of the Future of Work?
So my dream is to not be the face of what I'm doing. I'm a very passionate, excitable, and engaged individual in this world, but diversity begets progress, and the better the diversity of input, the better the output. And so my dream, what is next for me, is facilitating the championing of the best people in the world, building the best things from all sorts of different backgrounds, so that it is not my voice that is the one that heard, but rather a filtered collective of beautiful voices. The second thing in terms of Underpin and the association is Underpin is going to build this infrastructure, and it's going to be amazing, and it will be all over the world. Yeah. But the association is about facilitating the thing that I said previously. I want to find the best people in the world and use the skills and connections and access to money that I have to facilitate building a genuinely accessible and fair and prosperous future of work. Like, there is a basic assumption that if you, I think a lot of people have this assumption, but is that the future of work and freelancing means better diversity and accessibility and fairer. It doesn't. Like, it is an opportunity to rebuild systems to allow for that. But if you do not look at the systemic issues, if you do not look at the systemic issues that are arising or have arisen, and you do not deliberately try and break them down and change them, they won't change organically. So I want to use this as an opportunity to fundamentally change the infrastructure upon which things sit. And for me, that boils down to access to opportunity. The greater the access to opportunity, the greater the kind of commercial prosperity. And as a final point, like, the dream future of the future of work is not only like a capitalist utopia, it's also like a welfare libertarian utopia or a socialist utopia, in the sense that you can create incredible support systems for individuals while also generating massive amounts of competition and innovation. And I think that as a concept is very, very exciting.
I would agree. Wow. I look forward to hearing more about what we do with the Association of the Future of Work. And I look forward to finding an Underpinned branch or a location in California and in the Caribbean and all of these different places as well. So good luck with all the work that you're doing, Albert. And thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
I'd just say thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and I love talking to you always. So please, let's continue to talk.
For sure, same here. But just before we go, tell our audiences, where can they find Underpinned? Because I'm sure there's so many people in our audience that are thinking about starting their own business and they don't know where to start, because starting a business is like taking a whole new degree. It's a learning curve. So how can they get in touch with you?
You can do our business accelerator for £1. So go to underpinned.com, or type in Underpinned to Google, it'll be the first one. And go to our business accelerator, which is inside our software subscription, which costs £1 for the first month, and you can do almost all of the content in 1 month. So there is no reason why you wouldn't do it.
You just took away all the excuses. Brilliant. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for listening to another episode of Remotely Speaking Up. Take care, and we'll see you next week. Bye.